Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Our first story features a manager still finding his footing in his new role, and the woman who decided his breaking point would be a leftover sandwich from the day before. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. The takeout Karen who tried to bring the cops to lunch. So I'm a pretty new FOH manager at a casual sit-down chain. I moved up from the kitchen, line cook, to the front of the house. And even though I've never waited tables in my life, the sales background is helping. The transition's still bumpy, but my servers know I've got their backs, and most guests recognize me as the manager guy who can fix stuff. Last night, my host calls for a manager over the radio with a tone that says, "You're not gonna like this." I head up front and see a woman standing there with the takeout box flipped open. Inside is what used to be a sandwich, now a sad, dried-out corpse sprawled across the container like it fainted from shame. She tells me she bought it yesterday, didn't get a chance to eat it, put it in the fridge, and then, shock of shocks, it tasted bad today. Therefore, she wants her $22 back. I actually blinked twice. So I said, "Okay, just so we're on the same page, let me repeat what I just heard. And you tell me if I misunderstood anything." Then I recited the situation back to her. She nodded and said, "Exactly, I want a refund." I told her calmly, because I was still trying to be the reasonable adult here, that I couldn't refund food someone stored in their own fridge overnight and brought back the next day. She wasn't screaming or throwing a fit, but she was very insistent. Then she asked very seriously, "Are you going to call the cops?" I froze for a millisecond. "On you? Absolutely not." "Okay," she said. "Well, I'm going to call them." Now, on any other day, I might have simply said, "You do that," and walked away. But my host was standing there, wide-eyed, like he was witnessing a slow-motion car wreck, so I tried to de-escalate. I said, "Ma'am, I don't think that's a great idea. If they come out for something that isn't an emergency," and that was the wrong thing to say. Her eyes went wide like she was about to be featured on a documentary called Managers Who Abuse Their Power. "It's an emergency to me," she snapped, grabbed her purse, and sat dramatically on our lobby bench like she was about to testify before Congress. Then out came her phone. At this point, I didn't want to abandon my host to deal with the fallout, but I also didn't want to escalate things or embarrass the woman. So I did the only neutral thing I could think of. I sat down next to her, crossed my legs, folded my hands, and waited with her like we were about to watch the evening news together. She called 911. I could hear just enough of dispatch's voice through the quiet lobby to catch the highlight of the conversation. "You're calling the police over a hamburger?" I had to stare very hard at the opposite wall to keep my face neutral. The cops, unsurprisingly, did not show up. After a few more minutes of her sitting rigidly with her arms crossed, she finally looked over at me. I gave her my most gentle, sympathetic manager smile, the one that says, "I promise I'm not your enemy, but also I cannot refund your 24-hour-old sandwich." She sighed, stood up, gathered her things, and walked out, leaving the sandwich behind like a tiny, greasy monument to the weirdest 5 minutes of my shift. I felt this weird mix of triumph and pity the whole rest of the night. On the one hand, I stood my ground. On the other, she clearly wasn't okay. Nobody calls 911 over a refrigerated burger unless something deeper's going on. Part of me wonders if I would have handled it differently on another day, or if her tone hadn't been so demanding right out of the gate. But I also know a good manager shouldn't let service depend on whether a customer is polite or not. So yeah, something to think about going forward. But hey, at least nobody got arrested over a sandwich. You handled it correctly. In no situation should that woman or her behavior be rewarded. No logical person would or should think they can get a refund for day-old food that they didn't eat when fresh. Had you given them a replacement or a refund, you would have been rewarding and fortifying completely delusional behavior. That woman needed to be brought back to reality, and it seems like she may have been. And our second story. Sleazy Jet thought they had me with 330-pound baggage fee. They didn't account for my slot machine winnings. Back around 2006, when I first started traveling to London for work, I used to fly with a certain low-cost airline I'll call Sleazy Jet. Their London airports were, well, let's say, optimistically described. On a clear day with a telescope, you might just see London if you knew which direction to look. Getting there required a mix of trains, tubes, and prayer. Anyway, on this particular trip, I was flying out of London, Stansted. I'd just finished a 3-month contract and was heading home, carrying all my worldly work possessions in one massive bag. It was ridiculously heavy, and I already knew I'd be hit with an extra baggage fee. Fine, part of the deal, right? I got to the airport early and noticed a slot machine arcade nearby. With some time to kill, I figured, why not? I started with 100 pounds, and 2 hours later I was walking out with 800 pounds, mostly in 1-pound coins. This was before machines handed out paper money. So now I had an even heavier bag, and about 800 new friends clinking in my pockets. When I got to the check-in desk, the staff gave me that smug grin you only see from budget airline employees who've just caught another overweight bag. They told me it had cost 330 extra pounds. I could tell they were waiting for me to complain, argue, maybe beg. Instead, I smiled, agreed instantly, and began counting out 330 pounds in 1-pound coins. The look on their faces? Absolutely priceless. They went from smug to speechless in about 10 seconds flat. Everyone was technically compliant that day, but I still walked away the true winner. To this day, the memory of their shock still gives me a warm glow. There's something incredibly satisfying about watching a system built around squeezing travelers suddenly choke on its own rules. SleazyJet tried to play the usual game, penalize, push, and profit, but you didn't take the bait. You paid exactly what they demanded, just not in the convenient, tidy package they wanted. And our next story. I had my mother-in-law arrested for trespassing. I lost my wife, Anne, minutes after she gave birth to our daughter, Sammy. It was the happiest moment of my life, followed instantly by the worst. After that, I took time off work to take care of Sammy and to simply survive the grief. She's 4 months old now, and I finally decided it was time to return to work. Before making any decisions, I asked my mother-in-law, Sandra, if she could recommend a good nanny. Instead, she immediately offered to take care of Sammy herself. She said it would help her feel close to Anne. I didn't want to take that from her, so I agreed and gave her a key. She began coming over 30 minutes before my shift and staying through dinner every night. For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed fine. Then I realized Sammy wasn't eating much. Her formula bottles were barely touched. I asked Sandra if Sammy was refusing the bottle or spitting up. That's when she calmly told me she was trying to breastfeed my daughter. I honestly thought it was a joke at first. Then she explained that if a baby latches long enough, the milk will come. I told her she absolutely could not do that and that she needed to stop immediately. She insisted she was helping. I shut it down and she promised she wouldn't do it again. She lied. A few days later, I came home earlier than usual. Sammy was crying upstairs, so I went straight to her room. There was Sandra in the rocking chair trying to force my 4-month-old to latch. I grabbed Sammy out of her arms so fast the chair nearly tipped. I told Sandra she was done, that she was no longer acting as Sammy's caregiver, and that she could only visit when invited. She cried and tried to guilt me, but I didn't budge. I took another week off work and hired a professional nanny. She was wonderful, and I thought we were finally moving forward. 2 days later, she stopped showing up. When I called her, she said, "Your mother fired me yesterday." The more she described the woman, the clearer it was that Sandra had used her key, let herself into my house, and literally fired the nanny while I wasn't even home. Right as I was dialing Sandra's number, she showed up at my door like nothing was wrong. She claimed the nanny was incompetent and insisted she was taking her rightful place. I told her to leave. She refused. She told me she was calling CPS because I was endangering my child by not letting her breastfeed. That was the last line. I told her she had 2 options, leave on her own or leave with a police escort. She chose neither, so I made the call. When the officers arrived, she tried to pretend she lived there. She tried to say I was mentally unstable, that she was the only safe option for the baby, that I was abusing Sammy by starving her. The police didn't buy a word of it. After confirming she had no tenancy, no rights to the property, and no authority over my child, they charged her with trespassing and removed her from the house. She screamed, cried, and played the grieving mother card all the way down the driveway. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law called me heartless. They said I should be more patient, that Sandra just misses her daughter, and that I should put my grief aside to help her cope. But Sandra crossed every boundary imaginable. She tried to breastfeed my daughter. She tried to sabotage my childcare. She tried to overrule every single decision I made as Sammy's father. I'm grieving too. I lost my wife, my partner, my future. But Sammy's all I have left of Anne, and I'm not letting anyone, even her grandmother, put her at risk for the sake of her own emotional comfort. If that makes me the villain in their family story, fine. I'll be the villain who protects his daughter. Let's be perfectly, unequivocally clear about something from the very beginning. This is not a story about a family dispute. This is not a story about grief clashing. This is a story about a father protecting his infant daughter from a profound and dangerous violation. What you've described is one of the most clear-cut cases of justified parental action I've ever encountered. And our last story. A developer harassed my grandfather for years to sell his land. When I was a kid, my hometown was nothing but open skies, thick forests, and fields that went on forever. You could disappear for an entire afternoon and come home covered in burrs and mud, and no one blinked. Now, developers have chewed up nearly every inch of those forests and spat out strip malls, condos, clusters, and luxury townhomes that all look like cardboard boxes with a mortgage. Everyone feels the squeeze, especially older folks who've lived here long before the city people decided our area was the next trendy stop on their real estate bingo card. And no one felt it more, or fought it harder than my grandfather, Frank. Frank bought his property in the 1950s, back when the entire street backed onto miles of untouched forest. For decades, he tended a small garden, chopped his own firewood, and lived like the outside world didn't matter. But the outside world eventually found him. Developers swept in, bought nearly all the surrounding forest, and flattened it in a heartbeat. What used to be wildlife habitat turned into a giant dirt rectangle with survey stakes every few feet. Within a year, 90% of those woods were gone, except for one stubborn, inconvenient 2-acre chunk in the middle of the cleared land. That chunk belonged to my grandfather. They needed it to complete their mega project, couldn't build around it, couldn't ignore it, couldn't bulldoze it. The developers tried everything: calls, letters, friendly visits, increasingly large offers. Grandpa didn't budge. One afternoon when I was visiting, a shiny black SUV rolled up his driveway. "Mr. Frank, my name is Todd. I represent Creststone Development. We'd love to discuss an exciting opportunity." Grandpa didn't even let him finish. "No." Todd blinked. "You haven't heard my offer yet?" "I don't need to. The answer's still no." Todd's smile froze in place. "Sir, this land is, well, it's holding up quite a bit of progress." Grandpa pointed at the field. "Funny, seems like I'm the one with the progress." Todd tried again the next week, and the one after that. Eventually his tone changed from polite to annoyed. "This is becoming unreasonable," Todd snapped during his fourth visit. "You're delaying a major project. People need homes. The community needs the development." Grandpa leaned on his cane, staring him right in the eye. "Town grew just fine before you got here. It'll survive without more overpriced shoeboxes." Todd's jaw twitched. "Sir, we're prepared to offer—" "Son," Grandpa interrupted, "you stacked up 4 offers already, and every one sounded like you were reading from a catalog. You can keep your money." By year 3 of the stalemate, the situation was infamous. Everyone in town seemed to know about Old Man Frank versus the developers. Some people cheered him on, others complained that houses were needed. The developers were furious. Their entire project was stuck because of one elderly man with a piece of forest he refused to let go of. Then Grandpa died. I was devastated, but not surprised when 2 weeks after the funeral, a Creststone SUV pulled into my driveway. Todd got out wearing a solemn look he must have practiced in the mirror. "OP," he said, softer than before, "I'm truly sorry for your loss. Your grandfather was a determined man." "Yeah," I said, "he was. And now that the property belongs to you, we'd love to offer something generous, more generous than he ever heard, enough to set your family up for life." I could practically hear the dollar signs in his voice. "I don't know what he told you about the land," Todd continued, "but this could change everything for your family. Your grandfather held on for sentimental reasons, but you don't have to." I raised an eyebrow. "You think he didn't have reasons beyond sentiment?" Todd chuckled politely. "I understand the attachment, but this is an opportunity." I let him finish his little speech, all polished and corporate and full of fake concern. When he finished, he handed me a sleek folder. Inside was an outrageous offer, more money than I'd ever seen on paper before. "Take your time to think it over," he said. "We hope to hear from you soon." He walked back to his SUV looking confident. Maybe he thought grief made people malleable. Maybe he thought I'd be nothing like my grandfather. He had no idea. 2 days later, I called him. OP, he said, eager. I assume you've had time to review the numbers. I have, I replied. And the answer is no. Silence. Then, no? No. He inhaled sharply. Do you understand what you're turning down? Yes, do you? Todd's voice tightened. Your grandfather was stubborn, but you're young. Surely you don't intend to throw away a fortune for a patch of weeds. That patch of weeds is the last piece of forest our family ever had, I said. He protected it his whole life. I'm not selling. Todd dropped the polite act immediately. You're making a terrible mistake. I smiled, the same tired smile Grandpa used to give him. So are you, I said, because this land, it's staying exactly where it is. He didn't respond, just hung up. I heard through the grapevine that they tried everything, legal pressure, zoning loopholes, even another inflated offer, but nothing worked. They eventually halted the development entirely. The giant field sits empty now, a wide, barren reminder of how one man and then another stood in the way. Grandpa would have loved that. His land, my land, and not for sale. Your grandfather understood something that money can't replace, the value of a place that holds your family's history. Developers always assume everyone will fold when the number gets big enough, and Todd clearly walked in thinking he'd finally found the one person who'd take the bait. What he didn't expect was someone with the same backbone Frank had. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.